Thank you, everyone. One of the nice things about presenting this at AAPOR is that most of the people in this audience are going to be familiar with not sure what we call it, folk story or mythology about being great debates about whether we should have open-ended or closed-ended questions as the predominant method by which we do our surveys. The story that you probably all heard is that way back in 1944, there was this huge debate between government agencies, one which advocated that we should have open-ended questions to allow for details of responses, and one which said it's way too expensive, it's way too complicated, we do closed-ended questions. And supposedly this was settled by Paul Lazarsfeld, who argued that, well, okay, both are good, but asking closed-ended questions is cheaper and easier, so we should probably go with that. But even Lazarsfeld in that article talks about how, for most of us, there's just this intuitive idea. I mean, a lot of you have graduate degrees, and you probably know most every graduate student who studies public opinion has this idea that they are going to marry qualitative and quantitative research in some new way that is going to be able to get both of the benefits from these, right? And what we've seen at this conference is a lot of people proposing ways to do exactly that by utilizing AI interviewers. And so, needless to say, when we were thinking about this, we had a lot of questions. These are all the research questions that we pre-registered for this experiment. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm not going to go through all the different reasons why we did each one. If you're interested in this, you can email me for the paper, or I'll be, after we do another light revision, we're probably going to be posting this on the SSRN, and you can find it there. Uh, but basically, we decided that we were going to try to evaluate this experimentally. What is it that we get from AI interviewing that we don't get from, just asking a simple follow-up question about why people think the way they do? What happens to things like satisfaction with the survey when they have to go through these longer interviews and actually respond to open-ended questions? So we utilized the Engage platform from CloudResearch. We've done some things before with custom JavaScript and Qualtrics. We've done it, doing Shiny apps. But for this particular project, if we're going to experiment with this, we want to use something that has a track record and that has been gone through a little bit more development and field testing. And so the Engage platform is something that was used by Siena College in the 2024 election in order to figure out why people thought the way they did on various selection issues. It has a full development team behind it, and so we utilized it. Another benefit, it's at least last time I checked, it's free for researchers. Is that still the case? It's still the case. These are free for researchers to use. So that was another benefit. And we set up various treatment components. Again, I'm not going to go through all the components here, but we took these components and put them into 5 different treatments, which people were randomized into. The first one is just simply asking 2 closed-ended questions, which we drew from Pew, one about iteration and one about terrace. The second one used a fixed follow-up question. This is what most quantitative researchers do when they talk about asking an open-ended question, which is just to say, why did you say that? And then you have the person respond with a little box underneath, right? Third one is, and we did the closed-ended question with an AI follow-up, and then we also did a closed after the AI interview has taken place. And this is to get at order effects. I study a lot about deliberation, and we talk a lot about how conversation changes people's opinion. So if we're going to have a conversation, it's probably important to figure out what effect that conversation is going to have on subsequent expressions of opinion. And lastly, we did one with just the AI discussion with no closed-ended initially. And in all of these, we did one of these treatments. We asked a bunch of demographic questions and personality questions and things like that. And then we ended by asking the same closed-ended questions at the end in order to be able to see whether or not those changed. For example, if you follow up with an AI interview. For recruitment, we recruit about 2,250 respondents from CloudResearch Connect platform. We used a $3 flat rate of compensation, and this is important because that means that whether you did the AI interview or not, you were still paid the same amount, even if it took more time for you to complete the interview. So that will become important later on. The survey was quota matched to the US Census with the exception of the last 250 respondents. Those of you who have worked on this before know that sometimes towards the end it really slows down, and so you just relax the quotas in order to finish everything out. All right, so what do we find? First off, let's talk about duration and satisfaction. As you would expect, it took longer for people to complete the survey that included the AI interviews. It took about twice as long for them to complete the survey than it took for them to complete the closed only or the fixed follow up. However, if you look at satisfaction there on the right, you can see there is little to no difference in terms of survey satisfaction. A couple of the things, if you compare treatment arms, you can say, okay, they're statistically significant, but we're talking about a substantive effect of, I think it's what, point 0.1 on a 7 point scale in terms of satisfaction. So we're talking about very, very small decreases in terms of satisfaction. And this is bad when we look at the open-ended responses. We asked people what their favorite part of the survey was, their least favorite part of the survey was. We also asked them if they had any comments for the researchers. We went through and coded all of these. For every one response we had, which was critical of the AI interviewer, we had about 6 that were actually said that was their favorite part in one way or another. Uh, so and by the way, I should also emphasize kind of how crazy this is with professional respondents, because if you look at the people who had the closed only survey, their hourly pay rate came out to about $30 an hour. For the people who did our most intensive one, which was the AI that closed all up, that fell to about $12.50. Still ethical, but much, much lower. Um, all right, well, what do we get out of it? So we looked at the reasons that were provided for people's opinions in the various treatments. And then we went through and we coded up the number of reasons that we could identify in the open ended responses between the fixed follow up and the ones that did the AI interleaks. What we found was that we had way more reasons that were given that were identified. So usually you're talking about, and I think it was like a 20% increase in terms of the amount of reasons we were able to identify on average, based on utilizing the AI interviewer. But does this make any effect in terms of our estimates of how important different things are to people's decision making process? Well, they went through, and this is all described in the paper. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but we created a pipeline to utilize an LLM, in this case, GPT 4.0, through the API pipeline. So none of the data was saved or utilized for training. Uh, and we used it to label each of the interviews into which reasons people gave in those interviews. And we checked a random sample of this. It basically 90% accuracy, 90% plus accuracy in terms of this labeling procedure. And what we found was that, yeah, there was pretty significant differences in terms of what we would think of as recent prevalence between a fixed follow-up versus actually having some type of interactive interview. Um, for example, if you look at those who supported allowing undocumented workers to continue to live in the country if certain requirements are met, uh, there's a very large difference in terms of lack of criminal record being important in their economic contribution. If we look at just a fixed follow up, especially lack of criminal record barely registers in there, but it becomes the most important reason when you go through the AI interview. So a lot of people who are identifying unique reasons. Now, whether or not these unique reasons are areas which you can then apply, persuasion or things like that, that's something yet to be determined. I've got 2 graduate students who are part of my team, both of whom are trying to utilize the AI interview and as part of a broader platform to help develop experiments from each other. So what you're saying, if we're worried about weird samples, we as professors are the weirdest people in the room. And so, we're trying to utilize this to improve our ability to identify potential experiments. And we'll see one of those projects we present like AFSA next year. So if you're interested, stay tuned. The effect on opinion expression. What we found was that first off, if you had the AI interview, then the closed follow up, we did find that there was a little bit of a change in terms of people's support for undocumented immigrants being able to stay in the country. However, we did not find such a change in terms of the tariffs question. So it does look like having an interview before asking a closed-ended question can have an effect on responses to the closed-ended question, although it seems to vary based on the particular issue that's being evaluated. On the other hand, what we found was that if you had the closed-ended question and then ask and then did the AI interview follow-up, you had quite a bit of change in terms of their answers to the final closed-ended question after they've gone through and answered a collection of questions about their demographics, their personality, all of these other factors. Um, and then we found it was about compared to the flows only, is about 13% in the immigration topic. More people changed their answer at the end of the survey. What this suggests to us is that you do seem to have some kind of like deliberation within that is taking place where people, as they're thinking about it more, are moving. In particular, we found is that most often the pattern was that they were moving towards more polarized responses. That after having the discussion, they were more likely to strongly agree or strongly disagree than they were to, agree with. Um, that's what this is showing. It's the response extremity. It tends to increase when you have the closed followed by the AI follow. We also want to take a look at the AI interviewer itself and take a look and see whether the AI interviewer like applied with the instructions that we gave it in the prompt. And initially, when we did this again, we were using because we have over 4,500 responses to evaluate in this situation. You're utilizing LLM with human checks, which we again found to be quite accurate. But in this case, what we found was that almost half the time if we were detecting some kind of violation of the prompt. Now, when we saw this, we were like, holy crap, this is terrible. What's going on? Then we actually looked into it and figured out what was going on. Almost always, 95% of the time, it was detecting some kind of double barreled question. And so what happened basically was that we gave it a list of goals to ask about and to determine. And then we only gave it three questions in which to make this determination. So when it ran out of room, it started asking double barrel questions. So lesson here be don't give your prompt more goals than you have like questions with which to fulfill those goals. In terms of more harmful kind of things, we found almost no pushback or correction. Uh, really, the even the small amounts of pushback and correction we found usually were more, are you sure? What do relatively mild items here. Uh, we also noted that towards the double barrel question, both respondents actually responded well to it. They both answered both parts of the double barrel question when they were asked. So, not too bad. I'm gonna skip these here. Uh, we also found that there was quite a bit. So, despite customization, AI reduced or relatively consistent, which is important because we don't want them to be completely different from each other. We want to have some kind of variability. So the KL divergence was not that; it was about 0.81. So, what do we conclude from all this? Well, we found little to no effect in terms of satisfaction or roll off, which is quite encouraging. What we got from the interviews was different from more traditional quantitative elicitations, uh, and you know this. But the one thing we have to be careful of is that these interviews do have impacts on subsequent closed-ended responses, and so we need to better understand what exactly is going on there. Um, you know, there are a lot more questions raised. What are the nature of the differences or the effects of the differences in terms of the information that we're getting from these interviews? Um, Are there consistencies across different types of surveys, different modes of surveys? And how does this compare with humans or with broader face surveys? So, all the future work to go, this is one of those areas where the further I dig, the more I realize that there's more to do.